For as long as I can remember, my family has gone on road trips. Every summer, my mom, dad, brother, and I would pack our faithful minivan with the usual 1,000 pounds of luggage, buckle our seatbelts, pull out of the driveway, and venture into the unknown. On these vacations, we wouldn't just drive to the closest lake or city for the weekend. We went far and saw great wonders. Towering waterfalls, enormous mountains, faces carved into solid rock, and geysers. My family went to the national parks. My parents took me to the parks to give me an understanding of their role in this nation. They wanted me to realize that the initial history, early promotion, and modern-day inspiration of our national park system captures the very spirit of America. In order to comprehend the full importance of our national parks, we need to examine their initial history. This journey begins around the birth of our nation. Following the Revolutionary War, the United States was independent. But unlike most countries of that day, which had existed and developed for centuries, we were taking our very first steps in national parks. The American Experience by Alfred Roont, a British clergyman, went so far as to ask, in the four quarters of the globe, who reads an American book, or goes to an American play, or looks at an American picture or statue? In full reality, he was right. We were a young nation, and we needed an image of our American spirit to show to the rest of the world. We would find this spirit following a series of agreements with other countries, including the Louisiana Purchase, the Oregon Treaty, and the Mexican Secession. These purchases paved the way for early explorers to discover 3 unknown natural treasures within utter wilderness. The first of these discoveries was made in 1806, when an explorer named John Coulter traveled to the wilderness of Wyoming. According to PBS.org, Coulter found a stretch of land covered in bubbling hot pools, geysers, and a river carving through a canyon of yellow stone. Due to its bizarre description, however, claims of such land were ignored for years, laughed off, and referred to as Coulter's Hell. In the mid-1800s, 3 different expeditions were made to what would eventually become Yellowstone National Park, and then all this belief was completely forgotten. This unique land wasn't the only natural wonder to be discovered in the West. In 1851, a group of gold-hungry prospectors marched into the California mountains. But instead of finding gold, these miners found themselves staring down into a valley with granite plains and towering waterfalls. Upon hearing a Native American shout, "Yo Chimati," the miners assumed it to be the valley's name. And later, this name was recast to Yosemite. A few miles south of the Yosemite Valley, yet another group of explorers found trees. But these were not usual trees. These trees stood hundreds of feet tall. Once the public found out about the trees, there was a short and rather unusual dispute on what to name them. A group of Englishmen suggested Wellingtonia, after their famous hero, the Duke of Wellington. A group of angry Americans retaliated by claiming that Washingtonia would be a much more suited name. In an attempt to settle the argument, the trees were eventually named after the inventor of the Cherokee alphabet, Sequoia. As years went by, however, tragic things began happening to these spectacular lands. 2 claims were made on the middle of Yosemite Valley. Men were discovered fencing in Yellowstone's own geysers, and vandals stripped 116 feet of bark off a giant sequoia that was possibly as old as Christ. In response to these actions, a bill was issued. And in 1872, President Ulysses S. Grant signed Yellowstone National Park into being. Shortly after, both Yosemite and Sequoia were also given the protection of national park status. Now that the parks had come into existence, they needed promotion. The beginning of promotion came with our 26th president, Theodore Roosevelt. While most people know about Roosevelt's responsibility in creating the teddy bear, they don't know that he was one of the greatest conservationists of all time, and according to NPS.gov, is even nicknamed the conservationist president. Looking back, Roosevelt left behind the legacy of promoting the national parks and protecting over 230 million acres of public land. Despite Roosevelt's efforts, the national parks were hardly being visited at all, when at the same time, American tourists were spending a yearly amount of over $500 million overseas, predominantly in Europe. This wasn't happening because their scenery was better, it was because even Europe, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, was easier to access than the land within our own borders. The national parks needed easier access for Americans to be able to experience their own natural treasures. When realization of this came to America's railway companies, they worked overtime to construct a railroad reaching to all of our national parks. Upon completion of the railroad, the only thing the parks needed was publicity. In the early 1900s, there was only one way to be made known: at an event that brought the entire world to one place, the World's Fair at San Francisco in 1916. At this fair, the transcontinental railroads banded together to form the See America First campaign. This campaign was composed of catchy slogans, patriotic posters, and exhibitions constructed by the railroads to publicize the national parks around the globe. Looking back, the See America First project inspired the world. America's spirit of freedom and adventure had always existed, but had never been captured. Now this spirit was shown around the world, resulting in the parks becoming so popular that the entire national park system had to be revised. In 1916, exactly 100 years ago, President Woodrow Wilson signed into law the National Park Service, one agency designed to promote and protect our entire national park system. From 1916 to their 100th anniversary, the national parks have continued to inspire our nation by providing for us an image, capturing for Americans an ideal of freedom and adventure to hold up to future generations. Today, when Americans think of the parks, they are awed by the incredible wild scenery that represents the varied expanse of our nation. Some of the scenery, however, isn't wild. Some of the national parks that inspire us the most are within completely urban locations. According to National Geographic, 2/3 of the National Park Service's 392 areas were created to protect historic or cultural resources. One such place is the National Mall. That is where I traveled with my family 3 summers ago, and it was a trip I'll never forget. We left Kansas in October of 2012, and after 3 days of driving, we had arrived at our nation's capital. We toured all the city's monuments and memorials, including those dedicated to Lincoln, Washington, and Jefferson. It only added to my excitement when I discovered that what I was exploring was, in fact, a national park. Before that trip, my idea of the parks was a wilderness. But seeing the National Mall, with its imposing buildings and monuments, I was truly made proud to be an American. That day, I was given yet another image of our country's beauty. So have you ever experienced the image of America, her dignified white monuments, or her valleys, mountains, and plains, her expansive seashore, or her backcountry passes? If not, it's probably time to pack up the car for a family road trip. There is no better time than on the 100th anniversary of our National Park Service. Go learn about the history and the promotion of our national parks. Go be inspired. Go feel the spirit of our country. But above all else, go see America.